I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Michael Ledeen, writing most recently at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy for Pajamas Media and also at The Hill, is observing the Iran deal, the suspect's secret nuclear weapons program, and now under consideration at the U.S. Congress in the 60-day timeline for approval or disapproval. And Michael approaches the grand bargain with Iran that is a larger construction than just the facts of the nuclear weapons program. It also involves the aggression, the predation of the Iranian regime and the threat to the neighborhood and to comity throughout the Middle East. And what is to be done for the American people to slow this down, or better yet, to have a vision of what the next president will inherit. Michael, a very good evening to you. Is Iran at war with the United States, and what does that mean already? Good evening.
Hello, John. Thank you very much. Is Iran at war with the United States? Iran has been at war with the United States since 1979, when they proclaimed war against the United States, and they've waged it ever since. They've killed thousands of Americans all over the world, whether it's the roughly 1,000 in Iraq and Afghanistan, or whether it's Khobar Towers, or, whether it's poor John Steetham, who was dragged off an airplane in Beirut, and so we can go on and on. But yes, Iran's at war with us. And so I'm always struck that when Obama says, look, if you got something better than this deal, because I believe that if you don't approve this deal, there's going to be war, that critics of the deal should say to him, what are you talking about? The war is on. The war has been running for decades. What you're doing is appeasing our enemy. This just gives them money and access to technology and to weapons so that they can kill even more Americans. So I really think that the critics of the war, instead of going through all these details and all these annexes and all these unrevealed backdoor deals and so forth, should just say, this deal pays our assassins. We are paying Iran to kill Americans. And there just can't be anything more horrible than that. It just can't be. And so, of course, it should be rejected. And we should get on with winning the war. And there are ways to win the war. And I think that for the next administration, the issue is, how do we win the war? And the easiest way to win the war against Iran is, as Leon Wieseltier just said in The Atlantic, to support the enemies inside Iran, to come and support the dissidents and the opposition inside the country. I mean, just look at the way the Iranian regime behaves. This glorious moderate Rouhani has increased the tempo of arrest, torture, and execution by about 50% compared to the wild-eyed radical Ahmadinejad. More people are dying in Iran now than before. So what does that tell you about how the regime feels about the Iranian people? It's scared to death of them. And so anyone who sticks his or her head up over a foxhole gets clubbed. And we've got to support the Iranian people. That's what American tradition is all about. Not for Obama, but he's leaving, praise the Lord. And the next president will have a chance. But in the meantime, the candidates should be talking about this. They should say, we're at war, we're funding our enemies, we're making it possible for them to kill even more of us. And I think the clearest example of this is how angry Obama got the other day when a journalist asked him about the hostages, saying basically, well, how could we make this deal with Iran so generous, so good for them, so helpful to their cause, and not insist that the Americans that they're holding in their awful prisons be let out of jail. And Obama hit the roof. He was furious. How dare you? How dare you? And yet it was right. It is right.
Radical Islam. There's Shia radicalism, that would be the Tehran regime, and there's Sunni radicalism, that would be the ISIS or al-Nusra Front or al-Qaeda, and those who abet it in the Muslim Brothers. Those two radical camps, I put them together. Does radical Islam, Shia and Sunni, do they believe that they're defeating the United States? Do they believe they've defeated the United States? And does that matter to the American people, Michael?
Oh, yes, big time. They believe that they're living in an apocalyptic moment, that the time has now come when Islam will defeat the infidels definitively and rule the world. So look at what they say. Look at how ISIS governs. Look at what we have found in the very limited stuff that's been released from Osama bin Laden's computer files. They believe that, and who can gainsay them as they look around? We're in full retreat all over the Middle East, and they are triumphant. And yes, they have their squabbles between them, and if they finally do drive us out and take over, there'll be a reckoning between Sunni and Shia. But at the moment, all kinds of cooperation are possible. And they work together against us.
What does this mean for the American people? Because there is tiptoeing around the fact of it, Michael. And when there are incidents that are highly suggestive of young men with deep troubles being radicalized to murder other young Americans, there's an avoidance in this administration. Will that continue in the next administration?
Well, I hope not. There was in the last administration, too. Remember all this talk about Islam being a religion of peace. There's very little about peace in the Quran. There's an awful lot about war and killing and wiping out infidels and things like that. And that exists, and that's real. And we have to come to grips with that. If we don't come to grips with that, we will not understand our enemy. And short of that, we won't wage an effective campaign against them. And I note that more and more Muslims, let's call them moderate Muslims, all over the world are coming out and criticizing radical Islam, whether it's President al-Sisi in Egypt or whether it's a group of French intellectuals, Muslim intellectuals that just signed a call for Muslims to resist radical Islam wherever they see it, whenever they hear it, and so forth. They see it now, and more of them are openly saying they don't like it. It's the West that is so muzzled by political correctness and multiculturalism and so forth that isn't fighting the good fight. It's really quite amazing. I mean, the history of multiculturalism is truly fascinating. Did you know, I didn't know until I had to review a book about it recently, that leading American anthropologists, including Ruth Benedict, famous saintly intellectual hero, opposed the United Nations Declaration of Universal Human Rights because it was about individual freedom instead of group rights, for example? I mean, it's very deeply buried inside our intellectual culture. It's extremely dangerous.
Is it fear by the political class to take a position because they'll lose votes? Is it fear by the political class because it's ignorant, Michael? I can't understand why there is not an advantage in saying commonsensically, we're at war with radical Islam and we will win.
I think it's a combination of fear. Fear of being criticized by the New York Times and the others of that ilk, and ignorance. They come out of universities that have taught them this extreme form of cultural relativism where it's wrong to criticize other cultures because any given culture is as good as any other. And who are we to criticize, after all? Look at all the terrible things we've done. Obama does this all the time. When he talks about,
yes, he calls upon
violence.
the Crusades 1,000 years ago, a European fantasy. He indulges in fairy tales. Is that typical, do you believe, of the political class?
I think it's typical of our elites right now. I think it's the way they've been educated. I think it's what they've been taught, and I think it's what they reflexively believe. And so there's going to be a big fight if somebody chooses to fight it with these characters. But I say to people all the time, you don't like the way Obama talks or what he thinks and so on, come with me to any dormitory in any good college in America, and let's go downstairs around 11 o'clock at night and have a beer with them, and you will hear it. Because it's what they hear in their classes all the time. It's what they say to each other all the time. They don't know anything.
Michael Ledeen of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.